Hey everybody, Professor Moore here. So whenever I'm talking about the lynching of black Americans by white mobs with the students in my history courses, one of the next topics that we focus on is another form of racist violence that were known as race riots. Now, if you think about lynchings as the killing of black individuals, race riots were essentially the killing of entire black towns and communities. The worst outburst of this kind of racist violence occurred during the Red Summer of 1919. This particular case saw an explosion of white supremacist violence across the country that left hundreds of black Americans dead. And once we start researching the violence behind the Red Summer, what we're going to discover is that maybe race riot isn't the best term to describe this type of violence. Just like I discussed how the word plantation is a euphemism and hides the reality of the fact that these places were slave labor camps, once we start looking into these race riots, what we see is that it was nothing more than white supremacist terrorism. The historical context to the Red Summer of 1919 is the Great Migration. Starting in the early 1900s, millions of black Americans began leaving the South and heading north, trying to escape Jim Crow discrimination, racial violence, and also looking for better jobs in northern factories. Now, these people thought that they were escaping racism and violence. However, if you look at this map of where all of the race riots during the Red Summer of 1919 occurred, you can see that it's happening in all of these northern cities where black Americans had recently moved to. Now, this was truly violence on a national scale, and there are many stories to be told from the Red Summer of 1919. However, today I want to focus on the story of one city, and that is Chicago. On July 27th, 1919, a black 17-year-old named Eugene Williams was swimming at a Chicago beach, and he accidentally crossed over an unofficial barrier that was separating the white swimmers from the black swimmers. When Eugene crossed over this unofficial racial barrier, some white men on the beach began picking up rocks and throwing them at him. They hit Eugene in the head, he drowned, and died right there on the beach. Now, after Eugene had been killed, the black families on the beach began calling for police officers to arrest the murderer. The white man who had been throwing those rocks was right there. Everyone knew him. They could see him. However, when the police officers came, instead of arresting the murderer, they actually started responding violently to the black people calling for justice. As more black people heard about this story and began protesting and calling for justice, the white people of Chicago decided to rise up and put them back in their place and show them that even though slavery was over, they were never truly going to be free or safe in this country. They were always going to be second-class citizens. What happened next is an explosion of white supremacist violence. White gangs began going throughout the city and destroying, looting, and vandalizing black homes. At the end of days of this type of carnage, over 1,000 black homes were destroyed, leaving that section of the city looking like a bombed-out war zone. We can see a picture of the destruction that looks like it should be coming from the Western Front during World War I. Here's a picture of some white people in Chicago celebrating the destruction of black property. Here's another photo of the white people of Chicago looting and stealing from black homes. The level of violence was so shocking that a Japanese investigative reporter actually rented a small airplane and used it to fly over the city so he could take pictures of white snipers that were sitting on rooftops and shooting black people down below. Another remarkable photograph that we have from the Chicago race riot of 1919 is one of the first ever murders that was captured on film. A couple of white men chased a black man named John Mills into the back of an alley, and from this photograph you can see there was a journalist there that was able to capture the moment that these men were picking up rocks and bricks and they used them to stone this man to death. At the end of this outburst of violence, 15 white Americans and 23 black Americans were dead. When looking at this type of violence, I think we should really re-examine whether the word race riot is actually an appropriate word to use. And I actually agree with the historian William M. Tuttle Jr., who said, "Ethnic cleansing was the goal of the white rioters. They wanted to kill as many black people as possible and to terrorize the rest until they were willing to leave and live someplace else." Now, this is not only a tale of terror and tragedy, this is also a story of resilience and resistance. During the violence, there was a lot of black soldiers and veterans who formed defense units to protect their people and their community. Even though the goal of the white rioters was to terrorize black people and to try to get them to leave, they stood their ground and they fought back. This spirit of resilience and resistance was perfectly captured in a 1919 poem titled If We Must Die by the Jamaican poet Claude McKay. Claude McKay wrote, "If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back." When looking at the Red Summer of 1919, we have to recognize that this is not ancient history. This happened just over 100 years ago. Violence on this scale and at this level does not just disappear. It leaves a scar. And until we start to address that scar, it will never heal.